Hi there, Rebecca Koffler was censored but not silenced, and I will deliver some new information to you on the Russia-Ukraine war, but a very important and alarming component to it. We're now learning that the U.S. intelligence community, specifically the CIA, has been directly involved in that war. Here we go. The Central Intelligence Agency, and I have direct knowledge of this, routinely leaks information to two newspapers, the Washington Post and the New York Times. There are certain journalists, so-called journalists, that are in the CIA's Rolodex, and whenever CIA's leadership decides that they need to leak information, they do that. So there's an article that came out in the New York Times that basically talks about the secret military partnership between the United States and Ukraine, specifically the CIA. The war that has been prosecuted, that I have always called the war in Ukraine, is a proxy war between Moscow and Washington over the control of Ukraine, which Russia considers to be part of its strategic security perimeter. It's their version of our Monroe Doctrine. So it has now been confirmed, and I'll give you the facts and the details, that we have been prosecuting kinetic war, not just proxy war, but the CIA has been directly involved helping Ukrainians prosecute this war. The CIA sent intelligence officers, analysts to Germany. There was a center organized in Wiesbaden, Germany, where Ukrainian military personnel, U.S. military and intelligence personnel worked hand in hand to prosecute this war. Specifically, this was a joint partnership where U.S. provided intelligence, strategy, planning, technology, in addition to the $350 billion worth of military hardware that the U.S. has flown into Ukraine for the past 3 years. Okay, this is very important to understand, because thus far the narrative is that we are simply helping Ukrainians with money and with military hardware. What this article confirms is that we actually were directly helping Ukrainians do the targeting. We were providing target packages to Ukraine. Why is that? Ukraine does not have its own satellite capabilities. It does not own any satellite network of its own. Every aspect of U.S. military operations is done through space, through satellites. Communication, navigation, targeting, which basically involves the satellites are looking down and collect what we call imagery intelligence of military facilities, weapons depots, airfields, actual weapon systems, missiles, bombers, and those kinds of things. CIA gave those target packages to Ukrainians so that the Ukrainians could put iron on targets, right? So they could strike those targets. But because targets is a very provocative word, like if that were to be leaked, which now it has leaked, in my assessment deliberately, it would prove that the US is directly involved in the war with Russia. Well, they were trying to be clever, the CIA. So they wanted this process to be, and those targets to be referred to as points of interest. So that was the lexicon. In regular intelligence parlance, we do target packages, we do targeting. They were referring to them as points of interest. How clever. Basically, the Biden administration was directly involved in the war with the Russians. And that is exactly why President Donald Trump wanted to stop this, because he understood how close we are to a war with Russia, which would inevitably go nuclear if such thing did transpire. And that's why he wants to end this. He wants to de-escalate. Well, now it turns out we are in a kinetic war because we continue to provide military hardware and intelligence to Ukrainians. Now let's flip this and let's imagine that the Russians were having an intelligence center in Mexico. And they were helping Mexicans with their satellite networks to strike targets in the United States, in Washington, in New York City, or even somewhere in Ohio, let's say, or in Alabama. So that is what the equivalent, that's what is occurred. The center in Wiesbaden, Germany, is called Task Force Dragon. This is where this is the war cabinet, effectively, or as the Russians call it, Stavka. That's where the Ukrainians and the Americans were prosecuting and continue to do so, this war, and that's why Trump wants to stop it. It is actually a miracle that it still hasn't gone nuclear. As I said, imagine if the Russians were in Mexico in an intelligence center, devising target packages, identifying targets, military installations in anywhere in the United States. And they do have, obviously, the Russians do strategic targeting routinely, meaning they collect intel, and so do the Chinese. They collect intelligence, identify coordinates of all military installations, military hardware within the United States. And as you remember, the Chinese several months ago, maybe a year at this point, flew a balloon, a spy balloon, which contained capabilities of collecting coordinates and intelligence data, including top secret communications on US targets. Now, neither the Chinese nor the Russians are actually helping Mexicans to strike targets within the United States. But they do that in the event that we do something like that against them. Okay? And so now that occurred. This is exactly why Putin is not interested in ending the hostilities, because he now holds the upper hand both on the battlefield and from the standpoint of the correlation of forces. He actually even increased Russia's advantage in the correlation of forces, not just vis-a-vis Ukraine, but vis-a-vis the entire NATO alliance, by authorizing an additional conscription of 160,000 men between 18 and 30 years old. So over the next 3 years, the Russian military will reach 2.39 million men. That is the size of the Russian military, with 1.5 active duty personnel. For comparison, the US military has about 1.5 total, including National Reserve, with 1 million approximately active duty personnel. The other reason why Putin is not going to go for peace right now is because we have been changing Washington. Former President Joe Biden specifically kept moving the red lines. First, he was saying that the Ukraine will never receive permission from him to strike inside Russia using U.S. long-range missiles. Well, he changed that, and he did allow Ukraine to do just that. So looking at what's going on and how deeply involved the U.S. was in the past in this war, helping Ukrainians directly, not by proxy, but directly, providing target packages is a direct involvement that is considered as an act of war. We would certainly consider it as an act of war, right? If Russia or China provided target packages to Mexican military to strike targets in the United States, we would consider it an act of war, and we would act accordingly, right? So Putin does not rule out the possibility that the United States would deploy boots on the ground, even though President Trump said specifically he's not going to do that. Putin does not trust. So that is why he's preparing, he's augmenting even further the size of his military so that he can fight a war with NATO. If NATO and the United States decides to do so, and wargaming has shown that we conducted back in the intelligence community, simulating a Russia-US conflict, that kind of war goes nuclear. It goes through multiple steps, but they happen pretty rapidly, right? There's cyber warfare, space warfare, and then it goes nuclear. So this is the intelligence warning I wanted to provide. You can I linked the article, the New York Times article here that you can check out. If you find this information valuable, please follow me on all social media. I am on YouTube, Rumble, Getter, X, True Social, and like, subscribe, and you will receive regular intelligence updates, what's going on, not just in the Russia-Ukraine theater, but about the types of threats that U.S. homeland is facing. Thank you. Rebecca Koffler with Censored But Not Silent. I'll catch you later.